The United States is seeing some of its highest COVID-19 infection rates since the start of the pandemic. 29 states are experiencing surges. More than 37,600 new infections have been recorded in the country. Texas, which is the center of a surge, has temporarily stopped reopening plans. And that's not the only problem the U.S. is facing. Racial justice protests are continuing across the country, prompting the House of Representatives to pass a sweeping police reform bill. But the possibility of it becoming a law is slim amid partisan gridlock. Simon Marks has been following this situation and he joins us now. Simon, how's the COVID-19 situation in the United States? Now, it's not looking good.
Well, it's a very mixed picture, Dawn, and that's the conundrum that the government here is facing and also that President Trump's critics are facing. The White House Coronavirus Task Force will meet today for the first time in several weeks, and that's a direct result of the spiralling infections that are being recorded in a whole raft of states, many of them governed by President Trump's political allies, places like Florida, places like Texas. They're recording record numbers of new infections, more than 5,000 people in both states every day for the last several days, and that, most public health officials believe, is directly related to the pace with which those governors reopened their states' economies. So if you look at the national picture, over the last 2 weeks, the number of new cases is 54% up over a 2-week period. On the one hand, alarm bells ring. But if you look at the number of deaths over the last 2 weeks compared to the earlier period, that's down 30% over the last 14 days, which is why President Trump is emphasizing that the more you test, the more you find new cases. That's true. He claims America's mortality rates are among the lowest in the world now. That is not true, but it is true to point out that they are beginning to fall. One of the concerns health officials here have is that these new infections are now being spread among younger Americans, and that's a new aspect to the COVID-19 pandemic that, of course, then threatens the possibility that younger people will pass the virus on to older ones.
Just to change topics, Simon, tell us more about the police reform bill.
So this was a reform proposal passed in the House of Representatives. Remember that President Trump a few days ago signed an executive order on police reform. It's very different in tone and scope to what the House of Representatives, where the Democrats are in control, are proposing. They want to hold police officers more accountable for their actions. They want them to face the possibility of facing liability, damages awards in the event that they break regulations. It softens the possibility of members of the police force across the country facing criminal prosecution. It calls for an end to what's known as no-knock arrest warrants being carried out, the kind of arrest warrant that resulted in the death of Breonna Taylor, that 26-year-old woman shot in her own home by police in Kentucky as they burst into the house without knocking and making her and the other occupants aware that they were there. It also would halt the flow of militarized equipment to police forces across the country. It's never going to become law. President Trump has no intention of signing it, and the Republicans in the Senate won't get behind it. But it's a marker from the Democrats of how seriously they believe and aggressively they believe the country should be attempting to introduce police reform.
And thanks as always for getting us up to speed. Simon Washington from the US Capitol, Washington, D.C.